Good morning. This is Hap May with the Legal Play.
And I'm Chelsea El-Azzi. Hap, today I would like to talk about prenups.
All right.
Okay, so we are a tax firm, business firm. How do prenups come into this?
Well, prenups come in for a lot of reasons. There are tax reasons to do prenups. There are also estate planning reasons to do prenups, and we'll talk about postnups as well. Partition agreements, which are all kind of the general category agreements among married people as to how to classify and own their assets. But they have tax consequences. They have, as I said, estate planning consequences. And I mean, they do have divorce consequences as a result.
Right. And I think most people, when they think of prenups, is like, oh, okay, this is if you're planning to get married and at least one of the parties getting married has lots of assets, property, money, retirement accounts, and they're like, I'm about to get married, and I just want to make sure in the event of divorce, that I don't have to give everything over.
And I think that's probably one of the reluctances that people have that are either are married or are getting married is, well, I don't want to plan for my divorce.
And I'll admit, so this happened to me. I am married, and it's my husband's second marriage, my first, and he insisted that we enter into a prenup. And there are some emotions there. I mean, he was very straightforward about it, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it because I was like, well, okay, you're asking me to sign something planning for a divorce, but I don't want to get married with that even as a possibility in my mind. Except he's kind of like, no, let's be realistic. It is a possibility, however remote, but he wanted to plan for that. And it took some negotiation on our part to figure out exactly what terms could be in there that made him feel secure versus what terms made me feel, I guess, better about entering into the process.
And that's how, and it's more than just divorce, though, particularly for those people who have children from prior marriages that may want to take their estate and divide it between spouse number 2, 3, or 4 in the process, and their children from prior marriage. And there is a prenup that exists in the Texas statutes. The state government has decided what will happen, to your property. And if you're perfectly happy with the way the state government has designed your estate to be handled, you don't need a prenup. However, if you want to take into some other considerations and you don't want the government basically to tell you how your property is going to be divided, either in a divorce or in a probate, maybe you should down and take a look at it.
Well, and Texas is one of the community property states, one of, I think it's a minority jurisdiction in the United States.
There are, essentially, I mean, if I remember right, they are, California and Texas are both the biggest of the community property states.
Idaho's in there.
Idaho got in there somehow. Washington. I think New Mexico, Nevada, and Arizona are community property states. And just for a little history lesson, the concept of community property is a Spanish law concept. So those portions of the United States that were once part of Spain and later part of Mexico before they became part of the United States is where the origins of the community property law comes from. And there is in Texas this community property law. Now, when you study California law, you realize that they're both community property states, but there are a bunch of differences between them. But nonetheless, Texas is a community property state. Property acquired during the marriage is generally community property. Now, a lot of people think that means, well, each of them own half. Not necessarily true. In the case of a probate and a death, that it is each half. The estate and the deceased spouse owns half. The surviving spouse owns half. But in a divorce, the courts can divide that in a equitable manner.
Right, and so that's interesting that you say that because one thing some people might think, like, let's take the house for example, and I'll use my scenario where my husband purchased the house we're living in, and the title and everything is in his name. He is the only one that signed off on the documents. But we're married and we've been living in the house together. We moved into the house together, and I have put in, effort. I've had contractors come over. I've been there to, paint and do and kind of just help with the household things. Would I have interest in the house in a divorce?
The answer is probably no. I mean, its origin of title happened before the marriage. So that is his house. You may be entitled to reimbursement for some of the improvements you have made or payments you have made on the mortgage. You have to take into consideration the fact you also got to live there. So there's kind of this rent factor and improvement factor. So there's some things to discuss about that. But that origin of title is, whether that happened before marriage or after marriage, is the key determining whether it's separate property or is community property.
Now, bring in a prenuptial agreement where you can change whatever you want about that scenario and say, no, there shall be no anything, that went into the house, anything regarding the house is his separately, or I can say only in the event of divorce, that in the event of death, if we're still married, I don't want anything in the prenup to exist, and I want what would be rightfully mine under heirship laws of Texas.
Right.
So,
or under will, or heirship, or yes. I mean, all of that can be incorporated into a prenup. Now, a prenup is sort of before you get married.
correct.
And that's basically that says, this is mine, this is yours. Maybe it contemplates having some community property. Maybe it's written in such a way so that you'll never have community property.
Right.
In the process. So that's things to consider, with regard to that. There are partition agreements and postnup agreements, which happen after marriage.
And we did one recently for some clients, a partition agreement.
We have, yes.
And what was the scenario with them?
They had certain assets they wanted to divide up as what was his, what was hers. They are concerned that at some point in the time in the future that they will have some creditor problems.
Their prenup was executed in not the United States.
Well, it was executed actually in that case they had the effect of a prenup in a foreign jurisdiction.
Got it. Okay.
Basically, they made elections in that foreign jurisdiction. They came to the United States. And when they came to the United States, they wanted to make it clear that they had separate property. So they did something a little unusual. It is more of a confirmation of a prenup agreement that sort of recited the fact they did that. So that was it. And that was a situation where they were worried about whether they had creditors or not, and they wanted to make sure that the creditors who may have some claim to community property, which is depending on whether a contract claimant, in which case, I think they get half of the community property, or a tort claimant, which they may be able to take all of the community property. These are people who might get judgments against one or both of the spouses, but they can't touch the separate property. So that's one of the reasons is to have a marital agreement, prenup, postnup, partition, is to make sure that your assets are not vulnerable to the other spouse's creditors. And that's quite common.
Which may include the United States government and the IRS.
It may. And the IRS will recognize valid state law marital agreements. So if a husband and wife are married and they have a partition or postnup agreement that segregates out the assets, and it wasn't done the hour before the IRS levied or after the IRS had started levying. So there are some fraudulent conveyance issues that pop up there. But if somebody does that early at the prenup stage, or early or postnup before there is a problem, then you can avoid having these problems by having separate property interests as opposed to married property interests. I mean, so that somebody can say, I want to marry you, but I don't want to marry your creditors. And when we can figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, right.
You know, because I mean, I hate to see it when two people are in love and want to get married, but you know, he's got an IRS debt, so I mean, I can't marry him, you know.
Yeah.
Or
even if you don't have an IRS debt, but you just think that keeping your finances separately is a good idea.
Right.
I asked you, you know, if I was going to be married filing separately, you know, could we make it very clear to any agencies that's his property, his assets, his income. This is my property, my assets, income, even though we live in a community property state.
yeah, the answer to that, of course, the primary rule in Texas, different in California, but in Texas, is money earned on separate property is community property. So if let's say, wife who had been married before and has had a career, and now she's getting married again, and she has a large portfolio of investment income that she lives off of, gets married without a or a postnup or partition agreement, then the money that she makes off her investments is community property. And if you decide to do a married filing separate return, half of it, that income goes on her return, half of it goes on his return.
And if there's a prenup involved, which says, no, anything I earn
right
is mine, anything you earn is yours, then that's the evidence you can give to the IRS saying, we're not sharing this income.
That's one or two paragraphs going in a postnup partition.
Yeah.
And that's so some interesting statistics. I mean, I have always argued when people debate about or have this reluctance to enter into a prenup, besides the fact state government is going to draft one for you if you don't do it, is that, you know, people that can sit down and kind of draw lines and territories and says, this is mine, this is yours, and this is ours. And people who can go through a process and rationally do that, you know, are more likely to succeed as partners and as spouses, stuff like that. So that if you can kind of define that up front. Also, an interesting statistic is people who have prenup agreements are far less likely to get divorced than people who don't. Now,
is there any reason why that might be?
Well, that one of the reasons why is, generally speaking, most prenups are situations, second marriages, people are older, and the older people get, the less likely they are to get divorced. And we typically do those because there are children from a first marriage, and we're getting into the second marriage, and there want to be some clarity as to what's going to go to the kids and what's going to go to the spouse.
I think I agree with you. In my case, like I said, there was some emotional turbulence in the months leading up to it, and the conversations, you know, being had with my partner, my now husband, where I had to learn and kind of say, okay, well, if this is what's going to make him feel comfortable, if this is what's going to make him feel, you know, more at ease, you know, going into a long-term marriage with me, then I should respect that. And there should be compromises, and, you know, at least we can agree on what he wants to have included in this agreement, that I can say, okay, you know, I respect that, and I can agree to that, versus the language in there that, you know, made me feel comfortable, and it was a compromise. And I think if you can go into the marriage with that attitude of compromise and I guess practicality of what may come, and knowing that there may be hurdles up ahead, including some unforeseen predators, which are going to, you know, put strain on the relationship.
Right.
I think you're right, that there's just, you just kind of have more solid footing going into the marriage.
And combine the discussion of this along with the discussion of wills. because the other opportunity you have to direct where your property is going to go is in your will. And in that, you've got to decide, kids from a prior marriage, kids from the current marriage, or the spouse. How do I allocate my assets and look at what, from the prenup, postnup, what of it is I have to give, versus with this was, or is it all just community property, which the spouse is going to get half anyway. And in addition to that, look at life insurance. I mean, it may be that I want to give the business that I have to my son. I don't have a son, but I'm giving it to my imaginary son. Maybe my grandson be ready to take over the business. So, at that time, and I want to give that to, want to give the business to him. But that's the bulk of the assets. I'm not leaving my wife with much. So I have a life insurance policy.
Okay.
That was the idea that, so I've got a Postnup that says the business is mine. I give it, but I want to take care of my spouse. So I have a life insurance policy in the process. Or maybe the big value is in my house or my ranch, and I want my wife to stay there, after I go. So I have a life insurance policy that gives money to the kids in the process. So that's just a technique to kind of balance out whatever competing interests there are.
What you think is fair,
right?
What everybody thinks would be fair at the end of the day,
right?
But it sounds to me that there's a lot of different angles, a lot of different paths you can take, and we do that. We do that here in our office. We do all of them.
Yes.
So today was kind of focused on prenups, but we do wills and we guide people in life insurance and
life insurance trust,
key man insurance policies,
buyout divisions,
all kinds of things.
Stuff like that. So it's all part of the whole complicated process we have. We have, children and spouses and properties and business and the last thing we want to do is fight over them. So it's kind of,
or give it all to the IRS.
Well, that's true. That's true. So it's kind of good to maybe talk about these things early and kind of figure out what the landscape looks like, and use the tools like prenup, postnups, partition agreements, life insurance, wills, some other techniques. So figure out just how to protect yourself, at the same point in time, be fair.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today,
Right.
Hap.
May with legal play.
Thank you.